The End of Eternity by Isaac Asimov. Narrated by Paul Bamer.
Chapter 13. Beyond the Downwhen Terminus. Brinsley Cooper entered. Excitement flushed his thin face and made it almost youthful, despite the heavy Melanson mustache that draped its upper lip. Harlan could see him through the window, hear him clearly over the room's radio. He thought bitterly, a Melanson mustache, of course. Cooper strode toward Twistle. "They wouldn't let me in till now, computer." "Very right," said Twistle. "They had their instructions. Now's the time, though? I'll be heading out?" "Almost the time." "And I'll be coming back? I'll be seeing eternity again?" Despite the straightness Cooper gave his back, there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. Within the control room, Harlan brought his clenched hands bitterly to the reinforced glass of the window, longing to break through somehow, to shout, "Stop it! Meet my terms or I'll—" What was the use? Cooper looked about the room, apparently unaware that Twistle had refrained from answering his question. His glance fell on Harlan at the control room window. He waved his hand excitedly. "Technician Harlan! Come on out, I want to shake your hand before I go." Twistle interposed. "Not now, boy, not now. He's at the controls." Cooper said, "Oh? You know, he doesn't look well." Twistle said, "I've been telling him the true nature of the project. I'm afraid that's enough to make anyone nervous." Cooper said, "Great time, yes. I've known about it for weeks now, and I'm not used to it yet." There was a trace of near hysteria in his laugh. "I still haven't got it through my thick head that it is really my show. I'm a little scared." "I scarcely blame you for that. It's my stomach mostly, you know. It's the least happy part of me." Twistle said, "Well, it's very natural, and it will pass. Meanwhile, your time of departure on standard intertemporal has been set, and there is still a certain amount of orientation to be gone through. For instance, you haven't actually seen the kettle you will use." In the 2 hours that passed, Harlan heard it all, whether they were in sight or not. Twistle lectured Cooper in an oddly stilted manner, and Harlan knew the reason. Cooper was being informed of just those things that he was to mention in Melanson's memoir. Full circle. Full circle. And no way for Harlan to break that circle in one last defiant Samson smash of the temple. Round and round the circle goes, round and round it goes. "Ordinary kettles," he heard Twistle say, "are both pushed and pulled, if we can use such terms in the case of intertemporal forces. In traveling from century X to century Y within eternity there is a fully powered initial point and a fully powered final point. What we have here is a kettle with a powered initial point, but an unpowered destination point. It can only be pushed, not pulled. For that reason, it must utilize energies at a level whole orders of magnitude higher than those used by ordinary kettles. Special power transfer units have had to be laid down along the kettleways to siphon in sufficient concentrations of energy from Nova Sol. This special kettle, its controls and power supply, are a composite structure. For physio-decades, the passing realities have been combed for special alloys and special techniques. The 13th reality of the 222nd was the key. It developed the temporal pressor, and without that, this kettle could not have been built. The 13th reality of the 222nd. He pronounced that with elaborate distinctness. Harlan thought, "Remember that, Cooper. Remember the 13th reality of the 222nd, so you can put it into the Melanson memoir, so that the Eternals will know where to look, so they will know what to tell you, so you can put it—" Round and round the circle goes. Twistle said, "The kettle has not been tested past the Downwhen Terminus, of course, but it has taken numerous trips within eternity. We are convinced there will be no bad effects." "There can't be, can there?" said Cooper. "I mean, I did get there, or Melanson could not have succeeded in building the field, and he did succeed." Twistle said, "Exactly. You will find yourself in a protected and isolated spot in the sparsely populated southwestern area of the United States of America." "America," corrected Cooper. "America, then. The century will be the 24th, or, to put it to nearest hundredth, the 23rd.17th. I suppose we can even call it the year 2317 if we wish. The kettle, as you saw, is large, much larger than necessary for you. It is being filled now with food, water, and the means of shelter and defense. You will have detailed instructions that will, of course, be meaningless to anyone but you. I must impress upon you now that your first task will be to make certain that none of the indigenous inhabitants discovers you before you are ready for them. You will have force diggers with which you will be able to burrow well into a mountain to form a cache. You will have to remove the contents of the kettle rapidly. They will be stacked so as to facilitate that. Harlan thought, repeat, repeat. He must have been told all this before, but repeat what must go into the memoir, round and round. Twistle said, you will have to unload in 15 minutes. After that, the kettle will return automatically to starting point, carrying with it all tools that are too advanced for the century. You will have a list of those. After the kettle returns, you will be on your own. Cooper said, must the kettle return so quickly? Twistle said, a quick return increases the probabilities of success. Harlan thought, the kettle must return in 15 minutes because it did return in 15 minutes. Round and... Twistle hurried on. We cannot attempt to counterfeit their medium of exchange of any of their negotiable scrip. You will have gold in the form of small nuggets. You will be able to explain its possession according to your detailed instructions. You will have native clothing to wear, or at least clothing that will pass for native. Right, said Cooper. Now remember, move slowly. Take weeks if necessary. Work your way into the era, spiritually. Technician Harlan's instructions are a good basis, but they are not enough. You will have a wireless receiver built on the principles of the 24th, which will enable you to come abreast of the current events and, more important, learn the proper pronunciation and intonation of the language of the times. Do that thoroughly. I'm sure that Harlan's knowledge of English is excellent, but nothing can substitute for native pronunciation on the spot. Cooper said, what if I don't end up in the right spot? I mean, not in the 23rd.17. Check on that very carefully, of course. But it will be right. It will be right. Harlan thought, it will be right because it was right. Round. Cooper must have looked unconvinced, though, for Twistle said, the accuracy of focus was carefully worked out. I intended to explain our methods, and now is a good time. For one thing, it will help Harlan understand the controls. Suddenly, Harlan turned away from the windows and fixed his gaze on the controls. A corner of the curtain of despair lifted. What if? Twistle still lectured Cooper with the anxious, over-precise tone of the schoolteacher, and with part of his mind, Harlan still listened. Twistle said, obviously, a serious problem was that of determining how far into the primitive an object is sent after the application of a given energy thrust. The most direct method would have been to send a man into the downwind via this kettle using carefully graduated thrust levels. To do that, however, would have meant a certain lapse of time in each case while the man determined the century to its nearest hundredth through astronomical observation or by obtaining appropriate information over the wireless. That would be slow and also dangerous, since the man might well be discovered by the native inhabitants with probably catastrophic effects on our project. What we did then instead was this. We sent back a known mass of the radioactive isotope, niobium-94, which decays by beta particle admission to the stable isotope, molybdenum-94. The process has a half-life of almost exactly 500 centuries. The original radiation intensity of the mass was known. That intensity decreases with time according to the simple relationship involved in first-order kinetics, and, of course, the intensity can be measured with great precision. When the kettle reaches its destination in primitive times, the ampule containing the isotope is discharged into the mountainside, and the kettle then returns to eternity. At the moment in physio-time that the ampule is discharged, it simultaneously appears at all future times growing progressively older. At the place of discharge in the 575th, in actual time and not in eternity, a technician detects the ampule by its radiation and retrieves it. The radiation intensity is measured. The time it has remained in the mountainside is then known. The century to which the kettle traveled is also known to 2 decimal places. Dozens of ampules were then sent back at various thrust levels, and a calibration curve set up. The curve was a check against ampules sent not all the way into the primitive, but into the early centuries of eternity, where direct observations could also be made. Naturally, there were failures. The first few ampules were lost until we learned to allow for the not too major geological changes between the late primitive and the 575th. Then, 3 of the ampules later on never showed up in the 575th. Presumably, something went wrong with the discharge mechanism, and they were buried too deeply in the mountain for detection. We stopped our experiments when the level of radiation grew so high that we feared that some of the primitive inhabitants might detect and wonder what radioactive artifacts might be doing in the region. But we had enough for our purposes, and we are certain we can send back a man to any 100th of a century of the primitive that is desired. You follow all this, Cooper, don't you? Cooper said, "Perfectly, Computer Twistle. I have seen the calibration curve without understanding the purpose at the time. It is quite clear now." But Harlan was exceedingly interested now. He stared at the measured arc marked off in centuries. The shining arc was porcelain on metal, and the fine lines divided it into centuries, decicenturies, and centicenturies. Silvery metal gleamed thinly through the porcelain-penetrating lines, marking them clearly. The figures were as finely done, and, bending close, Harlan could make out the centuries from 17 to 27. The hairline was fixed at the 23rd.17th century mark. He had seen similar time gauges, and almost automatically he reached to the pressure control lever. It did not respond to his grasp. The hairline remained in place. He nearly jumped when Twistle's voice suddenly addressed him. "Technician Harlan!" He cried, "Yes, computer," then remembered that he could not be heard. He stepped to the window and nodded. Twistle said, almost as though chiming in with Harlan's thoughts, "The time gauge is set for a thrust back to the 23rd.17th. That requires no adjustment. Your only task is to pour energy through at the proper moment in physio-time. There is a chronometer to the right of the gauge. Nod if you see it." Harlan nodded. "It will reach 0 point backward. At the -15-second point, align the contact points. It's simple. You see how?" Harlan nodded again. Twistle went on. "Synchronization is not vital. You can do it at -14 or 13 or even -5 seconds, but please, make every effort to stay this side of -10 for safety's sake. Once you've closed contact, a synchronized force gear will do the rest, and make certain that the final energy thrust will occur precisely at time 0. Understood?" Harlan nodded still again. He understood more than Twistle said. If he himself did not align the points by -10, it would be taken care of from without. Harlan thought grimly, "There'll be no need for outsiders." Twistle said, "We have 30 physio minutes left. Cooper and I will leave to check on the supplies." They left. The door closed behind them, and Harlan was left alone with the thrust control, the time already moving slowly backward towards 0, and a resolute knowledge of what must be done. Harlan turned away from the window. He put his hand inside his pocket and half withdrew the neuronic whip it still contained. Through all this he had kept the whip. His hand shook a little. An earlier thought recurred, a Samson smash of the temple. A corner of his mind wondered sickly, how many Eternals have ever heard of Samson? How many know how he died? There were only 25 minutes left. He was not certain how long the operation would take. He was not really certain it would work at all. But what choice had he? His damp fingers almost dropped the weapon before he succeeded in unhinging the butt. He worked rapidly and in complete absorption. Of all the aspects of what he planned, the possibility of his own passage into non-existence occupied his mind the least and bothered him not at all. At -1 minute, Harlan was standing at the controls. Detachedly, he thought, the last minute of life. Nothing in the room was visible to him but the backward sweep of the red hairline that marked the passing seconds. -30 seconds. He thought, it will not hurt. It is not death. He tried to think only of Noyes. -15 seconds. Noyes. Harlan's left hand moved a switch down toward contact. Not hastily. -12 seconds. Contact. The force gear would take over now. Thrust would come at 0 time, and that left Harlan one last manipulation. The Samson smash. His right hand moved. He did not look at his right hand. -5 seconds. Noyes. His right hand moved. 0'd again, spasmodically. He did not look at it. Was this non-existence? Not yet. Non-existence not yet. Harlan stared out the window. He did not move. Time passed, and he was unaware of its passage. The room was empty. Where the giant enclosed kettle had been was nothing. Metal blocks that had served as its base sat emptily, lifting their huge strength against air. Twistle, strangely small and dwarfed in the room that had become a waiting cavern, was the only thing that moved as he tramped edgily this way and that. Harlan's eyes followed him for a moment and then left him. Then, without any sound or stir, the kettle was back in the spot it had left. Its passage across the hairline from time past to time present did not as much as disturb a molecule of air. Twistle was hidden from Harlan's eyes by the bulk of the kettle, but then he rounded it, came into view. He was running. A flick of his hand was enough to activate the mechanism that opened the door of the control room. He hurtled inside, shouting with an almost lyrical excitement. "It's done! It's done! We've closed the circle!" He had breath to say no more. Harlan made no answer. Twistle stared out the window, his hands flat against the glass. Harlan noted the blotches of age upon them and the way in which they trembled. It was as though his mind no longer had the ability or the strength to filter the important from the inconsequential, but were selecting observational material in a purely random manner. Wearily, he thought, what does it matter? What does anything matter now? Twistle said, Harlan heard him dimly, "I'll tell you now that I've been more anxious than I cared to admit. Senor used to say once that this whole thing was impossible. He insisted something must happen to stop it. What's the matter?" He had turned at Harlan's odd grunt. Harlan shook his head, managed a choked, "Nothing." Twistle left it at that and turned away. It was doubtful whether he spoke to Harlan or to the air. It was as though he were allowing years of pent-up anxieties to escape in words. "Senor," he said, "was the doubter. We reasoned with him and argued. We used mathematics and presented the results of generations of research that had preceded us in the physio-time of eternity. He put it all to one side and presented his case by quoting the man-meets-himself paradox. You heard him talk about it, it's his favorite. We knew our own future, Senor said. I, Twistle, knew, for instance, that I would survive despite the fact that I would be quite old, until Cooper made his trip past the downwind terminus. I knew other details of my future, the things I would do. Impossible, he would say. Reality must change to correct your knowledge, even if it meant the circle would never close and eternity never established. Why he argued so, I don't know. Perhaps he honestly believed it. Perhaps it was an intellectual game with him. Perhaps it was just the desire to shock the rest of us with an unpopular viewpoint. In any case, the project proceeded, and some of the memoir began to be fulfilled. We located Cooper, for instance, in the century and reality that the memoir gave us. Senor's case was exploded by that alone, but it didn't bother him. By that time, he had grown interested in something else. And yet, he laughed, gently, with more than a trace of embarrassment, and let his cigarette, unnoticed, burn down nearly to his fingers. You know, I was never quite easy in my mind. Something might happen.
The reality in which eternity was established might change in some way in order to prevent what Senor called a paradox. It would have to change to one in which eternity would not exist. Sometimes, in the dark of a sleeping period when I couldn't sleep, I could almost persuade myself that that was indeed so, and now it's all over, and I laugh at myself as a senile fool."
Harlan said in a low voice, "Computer Senor was right." Twistle whirled. "What?" "The project failed." Harlan's mind was coming out of the shadows. Why and into what, he was not sure. "The circle is not complete."
"What are you talking about?"
Twistle's old hands fell on Harlan's shoulders with surprising strength.
"You're ill, boy. The strain."
Not ill. Sick of everything. You, me, not ill. The gauge. See for yourself.
The gauge?
The hairline on the gauge stood at the 27th century, hard against the right-hand extreme.
What happened?
The joy was gone from his face. Horror replaced it. Harlan grew matter-of-fact. "I melted the locking mechanism, freed the thrust control."
"How could you?"
"I had a neuronic whip. I broke it open and used its micropile energy source in one flash like a torch. There's what's left of it." He kicked at a small heap of metal fragments in one corner. Twistle wasn't taking it in.
"In the 27th? You mean Cooper's in the 27th?
"I don't know where he is," said Harlan, dully. "I shifted the thrust control down when? Further down than the 24th. I don't know where. I didn't look. Then I brought it back. I still didn't look." Twistle stared at him, his face a pale, unhealthy yellowish color, his lower lip trembling. "I don't know where he is now," said Harlan. "He's lost in the primitive. The circle is broken. I thought everything would end when I made the stroke, at 0 time. That's silly. We've got to wait. There'll be a moment in physio-time when Cooper will realize he's in the wrong century, when he'll do something against the memoir, when he broke off, then broke into a forced and creaky laughter.
"What's the difference? It's only a delay till Cooper makes the final break in the circle. There's no way of stopping it. Minutes, hours, days, what's the difference? When the delay is done, there will be no more eternity. Do you hear me? It will be the end of eternity."
Chapter 14. The Earlier Crime.
"Why? Why?"
Twistle looked helplessly from the gauge to the technician, his eyes mirroring the puzzled frustration in his voice. Harlan lifted his head. He had only one word to say.
"Noyes."
Twistle said,
"The woman you took into eternity?"
Harlan smiled bitterly, said nothing. Twistle said,
"What has she to do with this? Great time, I don't understand, boy."
"What is there to understand?" Harlan burned with sorrow. "Why do you pretend ignorance? I had a woman. I was happy, and so was she. We harmed no one. She did not exist in the new reality. What difference would it have made to anyone?" Twistle tried vainly to interrupt. Harlan shouted, "But there are rules in eternity, aren't there? I know them all. Liaisons require permission. Liaisons require computations. Liaisons require status. Liaisons are tricky things. What were you planning for Noyes when all this was over? A seat in a crashing rocket? Or a more comfortable position as community mistress for worthy computers? You won't make any plans now, I think." He ended in a kind of despair, and Twistle moved quickly to the communiplate. Its function as a transmitter had obviously been restored. The computer shouted into it, till he aroused an answer. Then he said,
"This is Twistle. No one is to be allowed in here. No one. No one. Do you understand? Then see to it. It goes for members of the All-When Council. It goes for them particularly."
He turned back to Harlan, saying abstractedly,
"They'll do it because I'm old, and senior member of the council, and because they think I'm cranky and queer. They give in to me because I'm cranky and queer."
For a moment he fell into a ruminative silence. Then he said,
"Do you think I'm queer?"
and his face turned swiftly up to Harlan's like that of a seamed monkey. Harlan thought, "Great time, the man's mad. The shock has driven him mad." He took a step backward, automatically aghast at being trapped with a madman. Then he steadied. The man, be he ever so mad, was feeble, and even madness would end soon. Soon? Why not at once? What delayed the end of eternity? Twistle said he had no cigarette in his fingers. His hand made no move to take one, in a quiet, insinuating voice.
"You haven't answered me. Do you think I'm queer? I suppose you do. Too queer to talk to. If you had thought of me as a friend instead of as a crotchety old man, whimsical and unpredictable, you would have spoken openly to me of your doubts. You would have taken no such action as you did."
Harlan frowned. The man thought Harlan was mad, that was it. He said angrily, "My action was the right one. I'm quite sane."
Twistle said, "I told you the girl was in no danger, you know."
"I was a fool to believe that even for a while. I was a fool to believe the council would be just to a technician."
"Who told you the council knew any of this?"
"Finge knew of it, and sent in a report concerning it to the council."
"And how do you know that?"
"I got it out of Finge at the point of a neuronic whip. The business end of a whip abolishes comparative status."
"The same whip that did this?"
Twistle pointed to the gauge with its blob of molten metal perched, wryly, above the face of the dial. "Yes."
"A busy whip."
Then sharply, "Do you know why Finge took it to the council instead of handling the matter himself?" "Because he hated me, and wanted to make certain I lost all status. He wanted Noyes." Twistle said,
"You're naive. If he had wanted the girl, he could easily have arranged liaison. A technician would not have been in the way. The man hated me, boy."
Still no cigarette. He looked odd without one, and the stained finger he laid on his chest as he spoke the last pronoun looked almost indecently bare.
"You? There's such a thing, boy, as council politics. Not every computer is appointed to the council. Finge wanted an appointment. Finge is ambitious and wanted it badly. I blocked it because I thought him emotionally unstable. Time! I never fully appreciated how right I was. Look, boy, he knew you were a protege of mine. He had seen me take you out of a job as an observer and make you a master technician. He saw you working for me steadily. How better could he get back at me and destroy my influence? If he could prove my pet technician guilty of a terrible crime against eternity, it would reflect on me. It might force my resignation from the All-When Council, and who do you suppose would then be a logical successor?"
His empty hands moved to his lips, and when nothing happened, he looked at the space between finger and thumb, blankly. Harlan thought, "He's not as calm as he's trying to sound. He can't be. But why does he talk all this nonsense now, with eternity ending?" Then, in agony, "But why doesn't it end then, now?" Twistle said, "When I allowed you to go to Finge just recently, I more than half suspected danger. But Melanson's memoir said you were away the last month, and no other natural reason for your absence offered itself. Fortunately, Finge underplayed his hand." "In what way?" asked Harlan wearily. He didn't really care, but Twistle talked, and it was easier to take part than to try to shut the sound out of his ears. Twistle said, "Finge labeled his report, 'In re unprofessional conduct of technician Andrew Harlan.' He was being the faithful eternal, you see, being cool, impartial, unexcited. He was leaving it to the council to rage and throw itself at me. Unfortunately for himself, he did not know of your real importance. He did not realize that any report concerning you would be instantly referred to me unless its supreme importance were made perfectly clear on the very face of things." "You never spoke to me of this."
"How could I? I was afraid to do anything that would disturb you with the crisis of the project at hand. I gave you every opportunity to bring your problem to me."
"Every opportunity?" Harlan's mouth twisted in disbelief, but then he thought of Twistle's weary face on the communiplate, asking him if he had nothing to say to him. That was yesterday. Only yesterday. Harlan shook his head, but turned his face away now. Twistle said softly,
I realized at once that he had deliberately goaded you into your rash action.
Harlan looked up.
You know that? Does that surprise you? I knew Finge was after my neck. I've known it for a long time. I'm an old man, boy. I know these things. But there are ways in which doubtful computers can be checked upon. There are some protective devices, culled out of time, that are not placed in the museums. There are some that are known to the Council alone.
Harlan thought bitterly of the time block at the 100,000th.
From the report, and from what I knew independently, it was easy to deduce what must have happened.
Harlan asked suddenly, I suppose Finge suspected you of spying?
He might have. I wouldn't be surprised.
Harlan thought back to his first days with Finge, when Twistle first showed his abnormal interest in the young observer. Finge had known nothing of the Melanson project, and he had been interested in Twistle's interference.
Have you ever met Senior Computer Twistle?
He had once asked, and thinking back, Harlan could recall the exact tone of sharp uneasiness in the man's voice. As early as that, Finge must have suspected Harlan of being Twistle's fingerman. His enmity and hate must have begun that early. Twistle was speaking.
So if you had come to me—
Come to you? Cried Harlan. What of the Council?
Of the entire Council, only I know.
You never told them? Harlan tried to be mocking.
I never did.
Harlan felt feverish. His clothes were choking him. Was this nightmare to go on forever? Foolish, irrelevant chatter. For what? Why? Why didn't eternity end? Why didn't the clean peace of non-reality reach out for them? Great time, what was wrong? Twistle said,
Don't you believe me?
Harlan shouted, Why should I? They came to look at me, didn't they? At that breakfast? Why should they have done that if they didn't know of the report? They came to look at the queer phenomenon who had broken the laws of eternity, but who couldn't be touched for one more day. One more day, and then the project would be over. They came to gloat for the tomorrow they were expecting.
My boy, there was nothing of that. They wanted to see you only because they were human. Councilmen are human too. They could not witness the final kettle drive because the Melanson memoir did not place them at the scene. They could not interview Cooper, since the memoir made no mention of that either. Yet they wanted something. Father Time, boy, don't you see? They would want something. You were as close as they could get, so they brought you close and stared at you.
I don't believe you.
It's the truth.
Harlan said, Is it? And while we ate, Councilman Senor talked of a man meeting himself. He obviously knew about my illegal trips into the 482nd, and my nearly meeting myself. It was his way of poking fun at me, enjoying himself, cutely, at my expense. Twistle said,
Senor? You worried about Senor? Do you know the pathetic figure he is? His home when is the 803rd, one of the few cultures in which the human body is deliberately disfigured to meet the aesthetic requirements of the time. It is rendered hairless at adolescence. Do you know what that means in the continuity of man? Surely you do. A disfigurement sets men apart from their ancestors and descendants. Men of the 803rd are poor risks as eternals. They are too different from the rest of us. Few are chosen. Senor is the only one of his century ever to sit on the council. Don't you see how that affects him? Surely you understand what insecurity means. Did it ever occur to you that a councilman could be insecure? Senor has to listen to discussions involving the eradication of his reality for the very characteristic that makes him so conspicuous among us. And eradicating it would leave him one of a very few in all the generation to be disfigured as he is. Someday it will happen. He finds refuge in philosophy. He overcompensates by taking the lead in conversation, by deliberately airing unpopular or unaccepted viewpoints. His man meeting himself paradox is a case in point. I told you that he used it to predict disaster for the project, and it was we, the councilmen, that he was attempting to annoy, not you. It had nothing to do with you. Nothing.
Twistle had grown heated. In the long emotion of his words he seemed to forget where he was and the crisis that faced them. For he slipped back into the quick-gestured, uneasily motioned gnome that Harlan knew so well. He even slipped a cigarette from his sleeve pouch and had all but frictioned it into combustion. But then he stopped, wheeled, and looked at Harlan again, reaching back through all his own words to what Harlan had last said, as though until that moment he had not heard them properly. He said, "What do you mean you almost met yourself?" Harlan told him briefly and went on, "You didn't know that?" "No." There were a few moments of silence that were as welcome to the feverish Harlan as water would have been. Twistle said, "Is that it? What if you had met yourself?" "I didn't." Twistle ignored that. "There is always room for random variation. With an infinite number of realities there can be no such thing as determinism. Suppose that, in the Melanson reality, in the previous turn of the cycle—" "The circle goes on forever?" asked Harlan, with what wonder he could still find in himself. "Do you think only twice? Do you think 2 is a magic number? It's a matter of infinite turns of the circle in finite physiotime. Just as you can draw a pencil round and round the circumference of a circle infinitely, yet enclose a finite area. In previous turns of the cycle you had not met yourself. This one time, the statistical uncertainty of things made it possible for you to meet yourself. Reality had to change to prevent the meeting, and in the new reality, you did not send Cooper back to the 24th, but—" Harlan cried, "What's all this talk about? What are you getting at? It's all done. Everything. Let me alone now. Let me alone!" "I want you to know you've done wrong. I want you to realize you did the wrong thing." "I didn't. And even if I did, it's done." "But it is not done. Listen just a little while longer." Twistle was wheedling, almost crooning with an agonized gentleness. "You will have your girl. I promised that. I still promise it. She will not be harmed. You will not be harmed, I promise you this. It is my personal guarantee." Harlan stared at him wide-eyed. "But it's too late. What's the use?" "It is not too late. Things are not irreparable. With your help, we can succeed yet. I must have your help. You must realize that you did wrong. I am trying to explain this to you. You must want to undo what you have done." Harlan licked his dry lips with a dry tongue and thought, "He is mad. His mind can't accept the truth, or does the council know more? Did it? Did it? Could it reverse the verdict of the changes? Could they halt time or reverse it?" He said, "You locked me in the control room, kept me helpless. You thought, till it was all over. You said you were afraid something might go wrong with you, that you might not be able to carry on with your part. That was meant to be a threat. I took it literally. Forgive me. I must have your help." It came to that. Harlan's help must be had. Was he mad? Was Harlan mad? Did madness have meaning, or anything at all, for that matter? The council needed his help. For that help, they would promise him anything. Noyes, computership. What would they not promise him? And when his help was done with, what would he get? He would not be fooled a second time. "No," he said. "You will have Noyes." "You mean the council will be willing to break the laws of eternity once the danger is safely gone? I don't believe it." How could the danger safely be passed? A sane scrap of his mind demanded. What was this all about? "The council will never know." "Would you be willing to break the laws? You're the ideal eternal. With the danger gone, you would obey the law. You couldn't act otherwise." Twistle reddened, blotchily, high on each cheekbone. From the old face, all shrewdness and strength drained away. There was left only a strange sorrow. "I will keep my word to you, and break the law," said Twistle, "for a reason you don't imagine. I don't know how much time is left us before eternity disappears. It could be hours, it could be months, but I have spent so much time in the hope of bringing you to reason that I will spend a little more. Will you listen to me? Please?" Harlan hesitated. Then, out of a conviction of the uselessness of all things, as much as out of anything else, said wearily, "Go on." "I have heard," began Twistle, "that I was born old, that I cut my teeth on a microcomputerplex, that I keep my hand computer in a special pocket of my pajamas when I sleep.
that my brain is made up of little force relays in endless parallel hookups, and that each corpuscle of my blood is a microscopic spatio-temporal chart floating in computer oil. All these stories come to me eventually, and I think I must be a little proud of them. Maybe I go around believing them a bit. It's a foolish thing for an old man to do, but it makes life a little easier. Does that surprise you? That I must find a way to make life easier? I, Senior Computer Twistle, Senior Member of the All-When Council. Maybe that's why I smoke. Ever think of that? I have to have a reason, you know. Eternity is essentially an unsmoking society, and most of time is, too. I've thought of that often. I sometimes think it's a rebellion against eternity. Something to take the place of a greater rebellion that failed. No, it's all right. A tear or two won't hurt me, and it isn't pretense, believe me. It's just that I haven't thought about this for a long time. It isn't pleasant. It involved a woman, of course, as your affair did. That's not coincidence. It's almost inevitable, if you stop to think of it. An eternal who must sell the normal satisfactions of family life for a handful of perforations on foil is ripe for infection. That's one of the reasons eternity must take the precautions it does, and apparently that's also why eternals are so ingenious in evading the precautions once in a while. I remember my woman. It's foolish of me to do so, perhaps. I can't remember anything else about that physio time. My old colleagues are only names in the record books. The changes I supervised, all but one, are only items in the computerplex memory pools. I remember her, though, very well. Perhaps you can understand that. I had had a long-standing request for a liaison in the books, and after I achieved status as a junior computer, she was assigned to me. She was a girl of this very century, the 575th. I didn't see her until after the assignment, of course. She was intelligent and kind, not beautiful or even pretty, but then, even when young, yes, I was young, never mind the myths, I was not noted for my own looks. We were well suited to one another by temperament, she and I, and if I were a timed man, I would have been proud to have her as my wife. I told her that many times. I believe it pleased her. I know it was the truth. Not all Eternals, who must take their women as and how computing permits, are that fortunate. In that particular reality, she was to die young, of course, and none of her analogues was available for liaison. At first I took that philosophically. After all, it was her short lifetime which made it possible for her to live with me without deleteriously affecting reality. I am ashamed of that now, of the fact that I was glad she had a short time to live. Just at first, that is, just at first. I visited her as often as spatio-temporal charting allowed. I squeezed every minute out of it, giving up meals and sleep when necessary, shifting my labor load shamelessly whenever I could. Her amiability passed the heights of my expectations, and I was in love. I put it bluntly. My experience of love is very small, and understanding it through observation in time is a shaky matter. As far as my understanding went, however, I was in love. What began as the satisfaction of an emotional and physical need became a great deal more. Her imminent death stopped being a convenience and became a calamity. I life-plotted her. I didn't go to the life-plotting departments either. I did it myself. That surprises you, I imagine. It was a misdemeanor, but it was nothing compared to the crimes I committed later. Yes, I, Laban Twistle, Senior Computer Twistle. 3 separate times. A point in physio-time came and passed, during which some simple action of my own might have altered her personal reality. Naturally, I knew that no such personally motivated change could possibly be authorized by the Council. Still, I began to feel personally responsible for her death. That was part of my motivation later on, you see. She became pregnant. I took no action, though I should have. I had worked her life plot, modified to include her relationship with me, and I knew pregnancy to be a high-probability consequence. As you may or may not know, timed women are occasionally made pregnant by Eternals despite precautions. It is not unheard of. Still, Since no Eternal may have a child, such pregnancies as do occur are ended painlessly and safely. There are many methods. My life plotting had indicated she would die before delivery, so I took no precautions. She was happy in her pregnancy, and I wanted her to remain so. So I only watched and tried to smile when she told me she could feel life stirring within her. But then something happened. She gave birth prematurely. I don't wonder you look that way. I had a child, a real child of my own. You'll find no other Eternal, perhaps, who can say that. That was more than a misdemeanor. That was a serious felony, but it was still nothing. I hadn't expected it. Birth and its problems were an aspect of life with which I had had little experience. I went back to the life plot in panic and found the living child in an alternate solution to a low-probability forklet I had overlooked. A professional life plotter would not have overlooked it, and I had done wrong to trust my own abilities that far. But what could I do now? I couldn't kill the child. The mother had 2 weeks to live. Let the child live with her till then, I thought. 2 weeks of happiness is not an exorbitant gift to ask. The mother died as foreseen, and in the manner foreseen. I sat in her room, for all the time permitted by the spatio-temporal chart, aching with a sorrow all the keener for my having waited for death, in full knowledge, for over a year. In my arms I held my son and hers. Yes, I let it live. Why do you cry out so? Are you going to condemn me? You cannot know what it means to hold a little atom of your own life in your arms. I may have a computerplex for nerves and spatio-temporal charts for a bloodstream, but I do know. I let it live. I committed that crime too. I put it in the charge of an appropriate organization and returned when I could, in strict temporal sequence, held even with physio-time, to make necessary payments and to watch the boy grow. 2 years went by that way. Periodically I checked the boy's life plot. I was used to breaking that particular rule by now, and was pleased to find that there were no signs of deleterious effects on the then-current reality at probability levels over 0.0001. The boy learned to walk, and mispronounced a few words. He was not taught to call me Daddy. Whatever speculations the timed people of the child care institution might have made concerning me, I don't know. They took their money and said nothing. Then, when the 2 years had passed, the necessities of a change that included the 575th at one wing was brought up before the All-When Council. I, having been lately promoted to assistant computer, was placed in charge. It was the first change ever left to my sole supervision. I was proud, of course, but also apprehensive. My son was an intruder in the reality. He could scarcely be expected to have analogues. Thought of his passage into non-existence saddened me. I worked the change, and I flatter myself, even yet, that I did a flawless job. My first one. But I succumbed to a temptation. I succumbed to it all the more easily because it was becoming an old story now for me. I was a hardened criminal, a habitué of crime. I worked out a new life plot for my son under the new reality, certain of what I would find. But then, for 24 hours, without eating or sleeping, I sat in my office, striving with the completed life plot, tearing at it in a despairing effort to find an error. There was no error. The next day, holding back my solution to the change, I worked out a spatio-temporal chart using rough methods of approximation. After all, the reality was not to last long, and entered time at a point more than 30 years up when from the birth of my child. He was 34 years old as I myself. I introduced myself as a distant relation, making use of my knowledge of his mother's family to do so. He had no knowledge of his father, no memory of my visits to him in his infancy. He was an aeronautical engineer. The 575th was expert in half a dozen varieties of air travel, as it still is in the current reality, and my son was a happy and successful member of his society. He was married to an ardently enamored girl, but would have no children. Nor would the girl have married at all in the reality in which my son had not existed. I had known that from the beginning. I had known there would be no deleterious effects on reality. Otherwise, I might not have found it in my heart to let the boy live. I am not completely abandoned. I spent the day with my son. I spoke to him
formally, smiled politely, took my leave coolly when the spatio-temporal chart dictated. But underneath all that, I watched and absorbed every action, filling myself with him, and trying to live one day at least out of a reality that the next day, by physio-time, would no longer have existed. How I longed to visit my wife one last time, too, during that portion of time in which she lived, but I had used every second that had been available to me. I dared not even enter time to see her unseen. I returned to eternity, and spent one last horrible night wrestling futilely against what must be. The next morning I handed in my computations, together with my recommendations for change. Twistle's voice had lowered to a whisper, and now it stopped. He sat there with his shoulders bent, his eyes fixed on the floor between his knees, and his fingers twisting slowly into and out of a knotted clasp. Harlan, waiting vainly for another sentence out of the old man, cleared his throat. He found himself pitying the man, pitying him despite the many crimes he had committed. He said, "And that's all?" Twistle whispered, "No, the worst. An analogue of my son did exist. In the new reality, he existed as a paraplegic from the age of 4. 42 years in bed, under circumstances that barred me from arranging to have the nerve-regenerating techniques of the 900s applied to his case, or even for arranging to have his life ended painlessly. That new reality still exists. My son is still out there in the appropriate portion of the century. I did that to him. It was my mind and my computerplex that discovered this new life for him, and my word that ordered the change. I had committed a number of crimes for his sake and for his mother's, but that one last deed, though strictly in accordance with my oath as an eternal, has always seemed to me to be my great crime. The crime." There was nothing to say, and Harlan said nothing. Twistle said, "But you see now why I understand your case, why I will be willing to let you have your girl. It would not harm eternity, and, in a way, it would be expiation for my crime." And Harlan believed. All in one change of mind, he believed. Harlan sank to his knees and lifted his clenched fists to his temples. He bent his head and rocked slowly as savage despair beat through him. He had thrown eternity away and lost Noyes, when, except for his Samson smash, he might have saved one and kept the other. Chapter 15. Search Through the Primitive. Twistle was shaking Harlan's shoulders. The old man's voice urgently called his name. "Harlan! Harlan! For time's sake, man!" Harlan emerged only slowly from the slough. "What are we to do?" "Certainly not this. Not despair. To begin with, listen to me. Forget your technician's view of eternity and look at it through a computer's eyes. The view is more sophisticated. When you alter something in time and create a reality change, the change may take place at once. Why should that be?" Harlan said shakily, "Because your alteration has made the change inevitable." "Has it? You could go back and reverse your alteration, couldn't you?" "I suppose so. I never did, though. Or anyone that I heard of." "Right. There is no intention of reversing an alteration, so it goes through as planned. But here we have something else. An unintentional alteration. You sent Cooper into the wrong century, and now I firmly intend to reverse that alteration and bring Cooper back here." "For time's sake, how?" "I'm not sure yet, but there must be a way. If there were no way, the alteration would be irreversible. Change would come at once. But change has not come. We are still in the reality of the Melanson memoir. That means the alteration is reversible and will be reversed." "What?" Harlan's nightmare was expanding and swirling, growing murkier and more engulfing. "There must be some way of knitting the circle in time together again, and our ability to find the way to do it must be a high-probability affair. As long as our reality exists, we can be certain that the solution remains high probability. If at any moment you or I make the wrong decision,
if the probability of healing the circle falls below some crucial magnitude, eternity disappears. Do you understand?
Harlan was not sure that he did. He wasn't trying very hard. Slowly he got to his feet and stumbled his way into a chair. You mean we can get Cooper back?
And send him to the right place, yes. Catch him at the moment he leaves the kettle, and he may end up in his proper place in the 24th, no more than a few physio hours older. Physio days at the most. It would be an alteration, of course, but undoubtedly not enough of one. Reality would be rocked, boy, but not upset.
But how do we get him?
We know there's a way, or eternity wouldn't be existing this moment. As to what that way is, that is why I need you, why I fought to get you back on my side. You're the expert on the primitive. Tell me.
I can't, groaned Harlan.
You can, insisted Twistle.
There was suddenly no trace of age or weariness in the old man's voice. His eyes were ablaze with the light of combat, and he wielded his cigarette like a lance. Even to Harlan's regret-drugged senses, the man seemed to be enjoying himself, actually enjoying himself, now that battle had been joined.
We can reconstruct the event, said Twistle. Here is the thrust control. You're standing at it, waiting for the signal. It comes. You make contact, and at the same time squeeze the power thrust in the downwind direction. How far?
I don't know, I tell you, I don't know.
You don't know, but your muscles do. Stand there and take the control in your hand. Get hold of yourself. Take them, boy. You're waiting for the signal. You're hating me. You're hating the Council. You're hating eternity. You're wearying your heart out for Noyes. Put yourself back at that moment. Feel what you felt then. Now, I'll set the clock in motion again. I'll give you 1 minute, boy, to remember your emotions and force them back into your thalamus. Then, at the approach of 0, let your right hand jerk the control as it had done before. Then, take your hand away. Don't move it back again. Are you ready?
I don't think I can do it.
You don't think, Father Time. You have no choice. Is there another way you can get back your girl?
There wasn't. Harlan forced himself back to the controls, and as he did so, emotion flooded back. He did not have to call on it. Repeating the physical movements brought them back. The red hairline on the clock started moving. Detachedly, he thought, the last minute of life. Minus 30 seconds. He thought, it will not hurt. It is not death. He tried to think only of Noyes. Minus 15 seconds.
Noyes.
Harlan's left hand moved a switch down toward contact. Minus 12 seconds. Contact. His right hand moved. Minus 5 seconds.
Noyes.
His right hand moved. 0. Spasmodically. He jumped away, panting. Twistle came forward, peering at the dial.
20th century,
he said.
19.38 to be exact.
Harlan choked out.
I don't know. I tried to feel the same, but it was different. I knew what I was doing, and that made it different.
Twistle said,
I know. Maybe it's all wrong. Call it a first approximation.
He paused a moment in mental calculation, took a pocket computer half out of its container, and thrust it back without consulting it.
To time with the decimal points. Say the probability is 0.99 that you sent him back to the second quarter of the 20th. Somewhere between 19.25 and 19.50. All right?
I don't know.
Well, now look. If I make a firm decision to concentrate on that part of the primitive to the exclusion of all else, and if I am wrong, the chances are that I will have lost my chance to keep the circle in time closed and eternity will disappear. The decision itself will be the crucial point, the minimum necessary change, the MNC, to bring about the change. I now make the decision. I decide definitely.
Harlan looked about cautiously, as though reality had grown so fragile that a sudden head movement might shatter it. Harlan said, I'm thoroughly conscious of eternity. Twistle's normality had infected him to the point where his voice sounded firm in his own ears.
Then eternity still exists, said Twistle, in a blunt, matter-of-fact manner, and we have made the right decision. Now there's nothing more to do here for the while. Let's get to my office and we can let the subcommittee of the council swarm over this place, if that will make them any happier. As far as they are concerned, the project has ended successfully. If it doesn't, They'll never know. Nor we. Twistle studied his cigarette and said, "The question that now confronts us is this. What will Cooper do when he finds himself in the wrong century?" "I don't know. One thing is obvious. He's a bright lad, intelligent, imaginative, wouldn't you say?" "Well, he's Melanson." "Exactly. And he wondered if he would end up wrong. One of his last questions was, 'What if I don't end up in the right spot?' Do you remember?" Well, Harlan had no idea where this was leading. "So he is mentally prepared for being displaced in time. He will do something, try to reach us, try to leave traces for us. Remember, for part of his life he was an Eternal. That's an important thing." Twistle blew a smoke ring, hooked it with a finger, and watched it curl about and break up. "He's used to the notion of communication across time. He is not likely to surrender to the thought of being marooned in time. He'll know that we're looking for him." Harlan said, "Without kettles, and with no eternity in the 20th, how would he go about communicating with us?" "With you, technician, with you. Use the singular. You're our expert on the primitive. You taught Cooper about the primitive. You're the one he would expect to be capable of finding his traces." "What traces, computer?" Twistle's shrewd old face stared up at Harlan, its lines crinkling. "It was intended to leave Cooper in the primitive. He is without the protection of an enclosing shield of physio-time. His entire life is woven into the fabric of time, and will remain so until you and I reverse the alteration. Likewise, woven into the fabric of time is any artifact, sign, or message he may have left for us. Surely there must be particular sources you used in studying the 20th century, documents, archives, films, artifacts, reference works. I mean primary sources, dating from the time itself." "Yes." "And he studied them with you?" "Yes." "And is there any particular reference that was your favorite, one that he knew you were intimately acquainted with, so that you would recognize in it some reference to himself?" "I see what you're driving at, of course," said Harlan. He grew thoughtful. "Well?" asked Twistle with an edge of impatience. Harlan said, "My news magazines, almost surely. News magazines were a phenomenon of the early 20s. The one of which I have nearly a complete set dates from early in the 20th and continues well into the 22nd. "Good. Now, is there any way, do you suppose, in which Cooper could make use of that news magazine to carry a message? Remember, he'd know you'd be reading the periodical, that you'd be acquainted with it, that you'd know your way about in it." "I don't know." Harlan shook his head. The magazine affected an artificial style. It was selective rather than inclusive and quite unpredictable. It would be difficult or even impossible to rely on its printing something you would plan to have it print. Cooper couldn't very well create news and be sure of its appearance. Even if Cooper managed to get a position on its editorial staff, which is very unlikely, he couldn't be certain that his exact wording would pass the various editors. "I don't see it, computer." Twistle said, "For time's sake, think. Concentrate on that news magazine. You're in the 20th, and you're Cooper, with his education and background. You taught the boy, Harlan. You molded his thinking. Now what would he do? How would he go about placing something in the magazine? Something with the exact wording he wants." Harlan's eyes widened. "An advertisement." "What?" "An advertisement. A paid notice, which they would be compelled to print exactly as requested. Cooper and I discussed them occasionally." "Ah, yes. They have that sort of thing in the 186th, said Twistle. "Not like the 20th. The 20th is peak in that respect. The cultural milieu—" "Considering the advertisement now," interposed Twistle hastily, "what kind would it be?" "I wish I knew." Twistle stared at the lighted end of his cigarette, as though seeking inspiration. "He can't say anything directly. He can't say, 'Cooper of the 78th, stranded in the 20th and calling eternity.' How can you be sure?" "Impossible. To give the 20th information we know they did not have would be as damaging to the Melanson Circle as would wrong action on our part. We're still here, so in his whole lifetime, in the current reality of the primitive, he's done no harm of that sort." "Besides which," said Harlan, retreating from the contemplation of the circular reasoning which seemed to bother Twistle so little, "the news magazine is not likely to agree to publish anything which seems mad to it, or which it cannot understand."
It would suspect fraud or some form of illegality and would not wish to be implicated, so Cooper couldn't use standard intertemporal for his message.
It would have to be something subtle, said Twistle. He would have to use indirection. He would have to place an advertisement that would seem perfectly normal to the men of the primitive, perfectly normal, and yet something that is obvious to us once we knew what we were searching for, very obvious. Obvious at a glance because it would have to be found among uncounted individual items. How big do you suppose it would be, Harlan? Are those advertisements expensive? Quite expensive, I believe. And Cooper would have to hoard his money. Besides which, to avoid the wrong kind of attention, it would have to be small anyway. Guess, Harlan, how large?
Harlan spread his hands.
Half a column? Column?
They were printed magazines, you know, on paper, with print arranged in columns.
Oh, yes. I can't seem to separate literature and film somehow. Well, we have a first approximation of another sort now. We must look for a half-column advertisement which will practically, at a glance, give evidence that the man who placed it came from another century, in the up-when direction, of course, and yet which is so normal an advertisement that no man of that century would see anything suspicious in it.
Harlan said, "What if I don't find it?"
You will. Eternity exists, doesn't it? As long as it does, we're on the right track. Tell me, can you recall such an advertisement in your work with Cooper? Anything which struck you, even momentarily, as odd, queer, unusual, subtly wrong? No. I don't want an answer so quickly. Take 5 minutes and think.
No point. At the time I was going over the news magazines with Cooper, he hadn't been in the 20th.
Please, boy, use your head. Sending Cooper to the 20th has introduced an alteration. There's no change. It isn't an irreversible alteration, but there have been some changes with a small c, or micro-changes, as it is usually referred to in computation. At the instant Cooper was sent to the 20th, the advertisement appeared in the appropriate issue of the magazine. Your own reality has micro-changed in the sense that you may have looked at the page with that advertisement on it rather than one without that advertisement as you did in the previous reality. Do you understand?
Harlan was again bewildered, almost as much at the ease with which Twistle picked his way through the jungle of temporal logic as at the paradoxes of time. He shook his head.
I remember nothing of the sort. Well then, where do you keep the files of that periodical?
I had a special library built on level 2, using the Cooper priority.
Good enough, said Twistle. Let's go there now.
Harlan watched Twistle stare curiously at the old bound volumes in the library, and then take one down. They were so old that the fragile paper had to be preserved by special methods, and they creaked under Twistle's insufficiently gentle handling. Harlan winced. In better times he would have ordered Twistle away from the books, senior computer though he was. The old man peered through the crinkling pages and silently mouthed the archaic words.
This is the English the linguists are always talking about, isn't it? He asked, tapping a page.
Yes, English, muttered Harlan. Twistle put the volume back. Heavy and clumsy. Harlan shrugged. To be sure, most of the centuries of eternity were film eras. A respectable minority were molecular recording eras. Still, print and paper were not unheard of. He said, "Books don't require the investment in technology that films do." Twistle rubbed his chin.
Quite. Shall we get started?
He took another volume down from the shelf, opening it at random and staring at the page with odd intentness. Harlan thought, does the man think he's going to hit the solution by a lucky stab? The thought might have been correct, for Twistle, meeting Harlan's appraising eyes, reddened and put the book back. Harlan took the first volume of the 19.25th century and began turning the pages regularly. Only his right hand and his eyes moved. The rest of his body remained at rigid attention. At what seemed eonic intervals to himself, Harlan rose, grunting, for a new volume. On those occasions, there would be the coffee break, or the sandwich break, or the other breaks. Harlan said heavily, "It's useless your staying." Twistle said, "Do I bother you?" "No."
"Then I'll stay,"
muttered Twistle. Throughout he wandered occasionally to the bookshelves, staring helplessly at the bindings. The sparks of his furious cigarettes burned his finger ends at times, but he disregarded them. A physio day ended. Sleep was poor and sparse. Mid-morning, between 2 volumes, Twistle lingered over his last sip of coffee and said, "I wonder sometimes why I didn't throw up my computership after the matter of you know." Harlan nodded. "I felt like it," the old man went on. "I felt like it. For physio months. I hoped desperately that no changes would come my way. I got morbid about it. I began to wonder if changes were right. Funny, the tricks emotions will play on you. You know primitive history, Harlan. You know what it was like. Its reality flowed blindly along the line of maximum probability. If that maximum probability involved a pandemic or 10 centuries of slave economy, a breakdown of technology, or even let's see, what's really bad? Even an atomic war. If one had been possible, then, why, by time, it happened. There was nothing to stop it. But where eternity exists, that's been stopped. Up when, from the 28th, things like that don't happen. Father Time, we've lifted our reality to a level of well-being far beyond anything primitive times could imagine. To a level which, but for the interference of eternity, would have been very low probability indeed." Harlan thought, in shame, "What's he trying to do? Get me to work harder? I'm doing my best." Twistle said, "If we miss our chance now, eternity disappears, probably through all of physio-time, and in one vast change, all reality reverts to maximum probability with, I am positive, atomic warfare, and the end of man." Harlan said, "I'd better get on to the next volume." At the next break, Twistle said helplessly, "There's so much to do. Isn't there a faster way?" Harlan said, "Name it. To me it seems that I must look at every single page and look at every part of it too. How can I do it faster?" Methodically he turned the pages. "Eventually," said Harlan, "the print starts blurring and that means it's time for sleep." A second physio day ended. At 10:22 a.m. standard physio time of the third physio day of the search, Harlan stared at a page in quiet wonder and said, "This is it." Twistle didn't absorb the statement. He said, "What?" Harlan looked up, his face twisted with astonishment. "You know, I didn't believe it. By time, I never really believed it, even while you were working out all that rigmarole about news magazines and advertisements." Twistle had absorbed it now. "You found it." He leaped at the volume Harlan was holding, clutching at it with shaking fingers. Harlan held it out of reach and slammed the volume shut. "Just a moment. You won't find it, even if I showed you the page." "What are you doing?" shrieked Twistle. "You've lost it." "It's not lost. I know where it is. But first—" "First what?" Harlan said, "There's 1 point remaining, Computer Twistle. You say I can have Noyes? Bring her to me, then. Let me see her." Twistle stared at Harlan, his thin white hair in disarray. "Are you joking?" "No," said Harlan sharply. "I'm not joking. You assured me that you would make arrangements. Are you joking? Noyes and I would be together. You promised that." "Yes, I did. That part's settled." "Then produce her alive, well, and untouched." "But I don't understand you. I don't have her. No one has. She's still in the far up when, where Finge reported her to be. No one has touched her. Great time! I told you she was safe." Harlan stared at the old man and grew tense. He said, chokingly, "You're playing with words. All right, she's in the far up when, but what good is that to me? Take down the barrier at the 100,000th. "The what?" "The barrier. The kettle won't pass it." "You never said anything of this," said Twistle wildly. "I haven't?" said Harlan with sharp surprise. Hadn't he? He had thought of it often enough. Had he never said a word about it? He couldn't recall at that. But then he hardened. He said, "All right, I tell you now. Take it down." "But the thing is impossible. A barrier against the kettle? A temporal barrier? Are you telling me you didn't put one up?" "I didn't. By time, I swear it." Then... Harlan felt himself grow pale. "Then the Council did it. They knew of all this, and they've taken action independently of you, and
And by all of time and reality, they can whistle for their ad and for Cooper. For Melanson and all of eternity, they'll have none of it. None of it! Wait, wait!
Twistle yanked despairingly at Harlan's elbow.
Keep hold of yourself. Think, boy, think. The Council put up no barrier.
It's there.
But they can't have put up such a barrier. No one could have. It's theoretically impossible.
You don't know it all. It's there.
I know more than anyone else on the Council, and such a thing is impossible. But it's there. But if it is...
And Harlan grew sufficiently aware of his surroundings to realize that there was a kind of abject fear in Twistle's eyes, a fear that had not been there even when he first learned of Cooper's misdirection and of the impending end of eternity. Chapter 16. The Hidden Centuries. Andrew Harlan watched the men at work with abstracted eyes. They ignored him politely because he was a technician. Ordinarily, he would have ignored them somewhat less politely because they were maintenance men. But now, he watched them, and in his misery, he even caught himself envying them. They were service personnel from the Department of Intertemporal Transportation, in dun-gray uniforms with shoulder patches showing a red, double-headed arrow against a black background. They used intricate force field equipment to test the kettle motors and the degrees of hyper-freedom along the kettleways. They had, Harlan imagined, little theoretical knowledge of temporal engineering, but it was obvious that they had a vast practical knowledge of the subject. Harlan had not learned much concerning maintenance when he was a cub, or, to put it more accurately, he had not really wished to learn. Cubs who did not make the grade were put into maintenance. The unspecialized profession, as the euphemism had it, was the hallmark of failure, and the average cub automatically avoided the subject. Yet now, as he watched the maintenance men at work, they seemed to Harlan to be quietly, tensionlessly efficient, reasonably happy. Why not? They outnumbered the specialists, the true Eternals, 10 to 1. They had a society of their own, residential levels devoted to them, pleasures of their own. Their labor was fixed at so many hours per physio day, and there was no social pressure in their case to make them relate their spare time activity to their profession. They had time, as specialists did not, to devote to the literature and film dramatizations culled out of the various realities. It was they, after all, who probably had the better-rounded personalities. It was the specialist's life which was harried and affected, artificial in comparison with the sweet and simple life in maintenance. Maintenance was the foundation of eternity. Strange that such an obvious fact had not struck him earlier. They supervised the importation of food and water from time, the disposal of waste, the functioning of the power plants. They kept all the machinery of eternity running smoothly. If every specialist were to die of a stroke on the spot, maintenance could keep eternity going indefinitely. Yet, were maintenance to disappear, the specialists would have to abandon eternity in days, or die miserably. Did maintenance men resent the loss of their home wens, or their womanless, childless lives? Was security from poverty, disease, and reality change sufficient compensation? Were their views ever consulted on any matter of importance? Harlan felt some of the fire of the social reformer within him. Senior Computer Twistle broke Harlan's train of thought by bustling in at a half-run, looking even more haunted than he had an hour before when he had left with maintenance already at work. Harlan thought, how does he keep it up? He's an old man. Twistle glanced about him with bird-like brightness as the men automatically straightened up to respectful attention. He said, "What about the kettleways?" One of the men responded, "Nothing wrong, sir. The ways are clear, the fields mesh." "You've checked everything?" "Yes, sir. As far upwind as the department's stations go." Twistle said, "Then go." There was no mistaking the brusque insistence of his dismissal. They bowed respectfully, turned, and hastened out briskly. Twistle and Harlan were alone in the kettleways. Twistle turned to him. "You'll stay here, please." Harlan shook his head. "I must go." Twistle said, "Surely you understand. If anything happens to me, you still know how to find Cooper.
If anything happens to you, what can I or any Eternal or any combination of Eternals do alone?
Harlan shook his head again. Twistle put a cigarette between his lips. He said,
Senor is suspicious. He's called me several times in the last 2 physio days. Why am I in seclusion, he wants to know. When he finds out I've ordered a complete overhaul of the Kettleway machinery... I must go now, Harlan, I can't delay.
I don't want delay. I'm ready.
You insist on going?
If there's no barrier, there'll be no danger. Even if there is, I've been there already and come back. What are you afraid of, computer?
I don't want to risk anything I don't have to.
Then use your logic, computer. Make the decision that I'm to go with you. If eternity still exists after that, then it means that the circle can still be closed. It means we'll survive. If it's a wrong decision, then eternity will pass into non-existence. But it will anyway if I don't go, because without Noyes, I'll make no move to get Cooper, I swear it.
Twistle said, I'll bring her back to you.
If it is so simple and safe, there will be no harm if I come along. Twistle was in an obvious torture of hesitation. He said gruffly,
Well then come.
And eternity survived. Twistle's haunted look did not disappear once they were within the kettle. He stared at the skimming figures of the temperometer, even the scalar gauge, which measured in units of kilocenturies, and which the men had adjusted for this particular purpose, was clicking at minute intervals. He said,
You should not have come.
Harlan shrugged. Why not?
It disturbs me. No sensible reason. Call it a long-standing superstition of mine. It makes me restless.
He clasped his hands together, holding them tightly. Harlan said, I don't understand you. Twistle seemed eager to talk, as though to exorcise some mental demon.
He said, Maybe you'll appreciate this at that. You're the expert on the primitive. How long did man exist in the primitive?
Harlan said, 10,000 centuries. 15,000 maybe.
Yes. Beginning as a kind of primitive ape-like creature and ending as Homo sapiens, right?
It's common knowledge, yes.
Then it must be common knowledge that evolution proceeds at a fairly rapid pace. 15,000 centuries from ape to Homo sapiens.
Well?
Well, I'm from a century in the 30,000s.
Harlan could not help starting. He had never known Twistle's home when, or known of anyone who did.
I'm from a century in the 30,000s,
Twistle said again.
And you're from the 95th. The time between our home whens is twice the total length of time of man's existence in the primitive, yet what change is there between us? I was born with 4 fewer teeth than you, and without an appendix. The physiological differences about end with that. Our metabolism is almost the same. The major difference is that your body can synthesize the steroid nucleus and my body can't, so that I require cholesterol in my diet and you don't. I was able to breed with a woman of the 575th. That's how undifferentiated with time the species is.
Harlan was unimpressed. He had never questioned the basic identity of man throughout the centuries. It was one of those things you lived with and took for granted. He said, There have been cases of species living unchanged through millions of centuries.
Not many, though. And it remains a fact that the cessation of human evolution seems to coincide with the development of eternity. Just coincidence? It's not a question which is considered except by a few here and there like Senor, and I've never been a Senor. I didn't believe speculation was proper. If something couldn't be checked by a computerplex, it had no business taking up the time of a computer, and yet, in my younger days, I sometimes thought...
Of what? Harlan thought, well, it's something to listen to anyway.
I sometimes thought about eternity as it was when it was first established. It stretched over just a few centuries in the 30s and 40s, and its function was mostly trade. It interested itself in the reforestation of denuded areas, shipping topsoil back and forth, fresh water, fine chemicals. Those were simple days. But then we discovered reality changes. Senior computer Henry Wadsman, in the dramatic manner with which we are all acquainted, prevented a war by removing the safety brake of a congressman's ground vehicle. After that, more and more, eternity shifted its center of gravity from trade to reality change. Why?
Harlan said, The obvious reason. Betterment of humanity.
Yes, yes, in normal times I think so too, but I'm talking of my nightmare. What if there were another reason? An unexpressed one, an unconscious one. A man who can travel into the indefinite future may meet men as far advanced over himself as he himself is over an ape. Why not? Maybe, but men are men, even in the 70,000th, yes, I know. And have our reality changes had something to do with it? We bred out the unusual. Even Senor's home when, with its hairless creatures, is under continual question, and that's harmless enough. Perhaps, in all honesty, in all sincerity, we've prevented human evolution because we don't want to meet the supermen. Still no spark was struck. Harlan said, "Then it's done, what does it matter?" But what if the Superman exists just the same, further up when than we can reach? We control only to the 70,000th. Beyond that are the hidden centuries. Why are they hidden? Because evolved man does not want to deal with us and bars us from his time? Why do we allow them to remain hidden? Because we don't want to deal with them, and having failed to enter in our first attempt, we refuse even to make additional attempts? I don't say it's our conscious reason, but conscious or unconscious, it's a reason. Grant everything, said Harlan sullenly. They're out of our reach, and we're out of theirs. Live and let live. Twistle seemed struck by the phrase. Live and let live. But we don't. We make changes. The changes extend only through a few centuries before temporal inertia causes its effects to die out. You remember Senor brought that up as one of the unanswered problems of time at our breakfast? What he might have said was that it's all a matter of statistics. Some changes affect more centuries than others. Theoretically, any number of centuries can be affected by the proper change, 100 centuries, 1,000, 100,000. Evolved man of the hidden centuries may know that. Suppose he is disturbed by the possibility that someday a change may reach him clear to the 200,000th. It's useless to worry about such things, said Harlan, with the air of a man who had much greater worries. But suppose, went on Twistle in a whisper, they were calm enough as long as we left the sections of the hidden centuries empty. It meant we weren't aggressing. Suppose this truce, or whatever you wish to call it, were broken, and someone appeared to have established permanent residence upwind from the 70,000th. Suppose they thought it might mean the first of a serious invasion. They can bar us from their time, so their science is that far advanced beyond ours. Suppose they may further do what seems impossible to us, and throw a barrier across the kettleways, cutting us off. And now Harlan was on his feet, in full horror. They have Noyes. I don't know. It's speculation. Maybe there is no barrier. Maybe there was something wrong with your kit. There was a barrier, yelled Harlan. What other explanation is there? Why didn't you tell me this before? I don't believe it, groaned Twistle. I still don't. I shouldn't have said a word of this foolish dreaming. My own fears, the question of Cooper, everything. But wait, just a few minutes. He pointed at the temperometer. The scaler indicated them to be between the 95,000th and 96,000th centuries. Twistle's hand on the controls slowed the kettle. The 99,000th was past. The scaler's motions stopped. The individual centuries could be read. 99,726, 99,727, 99,728. What will we do? Muttered Harlan. Twistle shook his head in a gesture that spoke eloquently of patience and hope, but perhaps also of helplessness. 99,851, 99,852, 99,853. Harlan steeled himself for the shock of the barrier, and thought desperately. Would preserving eternity be the only means of finding time to fight back at the creatures of the hidden centuries? How else recover Noyes? Dash back to the 575th, and work like fury to 99,938, 99,939, 99,940. Harlan held his breath. Twistle slowed the kettle further, let it creep. It responded perfectly to the controls. 99,984, 99,985, 99,986. Now, said Harlan in a whisper,
unaware that he had made any sound at all. 99,998. 99,999. 100,000. 100,101. 100,102. The numbers mounted, and the two men watched them continue to mount in paralytic silence. Then Twistle cried, "There is no barrier!" And Harlan answered, There was. Then in agony, "Maybe they've got her, and need a barrier no longer." 111,394th. Harlan leaped from the kettle, and raised his voice. "Noyes! Noyes!" The echoes bounced off the walls of the empty section in hollow syncopation. Twistle, climbing out more sedately, called after the younger man, "Wait, Harlan!" That was useless. Harlan, at a run, was hurtling along the corridors toward that portion of the section they had made a kind of home. He thought vaguely of the possibility of meeting one of Twistle's evolved men, and momentarily his skin prickled. But then that was drowned in his urgent need to find Noyes. "Noyes!" And all at once, so quickly that she was in his arms before he was sure he had seen her at all, she was there with him, and her arms were around him and clutching him, and her cheek was against his shoulder, and her dark hair was soft against his chin. "Andrew," she said, her voice muffled by the pressure of his body. "Where were you? It's been days, and I was getting frightened." Harlan held her out at arm's length, staring at her with a kind of hungry solemnity. "Are you all right?" "I'm all right. I thought something might have happened to you. I thought—" She broke off, terror springing into her eyes, and gasped, "Andrew!" Harlan whirled. It was only Twistle, panting. Noyes must have gained confidence from Harlan's expression. She said more quietly, "Do you know him, Andrew? Is it all right?" Harlan said, "It's all right. This is my superior, Senior Computer Laban Twistle. He knows of you." "A senior computer?" Noyes shrank away. Twistle advanced slowly. "I will help you, my child. I will help you both. The technician has my promise, if he would only believe it." "My apologies, computer," said Harlan stiffly, and not yet entirely repentant. "Forgiven," said Twistle. He held out his hand, took the girl's reluctant one. "Tell me, girl, has it been well with you here?" "I've been worried." "There's been no one here since Harlan last left you?" "No, sir." "No one at all? Nothing?" She shook her head. Her dark eyes sought Harlan's. "Why do you ask?" "Nothing, girl. A foolish nightmare. Come, we will take you back to the 575th. On the kettle back, Andrew Harlan sank, by degrees, into a troubled and deepening silence. He did not look up when the 100,000th was passed in the downwind direction, and Twistle had snorted an obvious sigh of relief, as though he had half expected to be trapped on the upwind side. He scarcely moved when Noyes' hand stole into his, and the manner in which he returned the pressure of her fingers was almost mechanical. Noyes slept in another room, and now Twistle's restlessness reached a peak of devouring intensity. "The advertisement, boy. You have your woman. My part of the agreement is done." Silently, still abstracted, Harlan turned the pages of the volume on the desk. He found his page. "It's simple enough," he said, "but it's in English. I'll read it to you and then translate it." It was a small advertisement in the upper left-hand corner of a page numbered 30. Against an irregular line drawing as background were the unadorned words, in block letters, "All the talk of the market." Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, "Investments Newsletter, P.O. Box 14, Denver, Colorado." Twistle listened painstakingly to Harlan's translation and was obviously disappointed. He said, "What is the market? What do they mean by that?" "The stock market," said Harlan impatiently. "A system by which private capital was invested in business, but that's not the point at all. Don't you see the line drawing against which the advertisement is set?" "Yes, the mushroom cloud of an A-bomb blast. An attention-getter. What about it?"
Harlan exploded. Great time, computer. What's wrong with you? Look at the date of the magazine issue.
He pointed to the top heading, just to the left of the page number. It read, March 28th, 1932. Harlan said, "That scarcely needs translation. The numbers are about those of standard intertemporal, and you see it's the 19.32nd century. Don't you know that at that time no human being who had ever lived had seen the mushroom cloud? No one could possibly reproduce it so accurately, except—"
"Now wait. It's just a line pattern," said Twistle, trying to retain his equilibrium. "It might resemble the mushroom cloud only coincidentally."
"Might it? Will you look at the wording again?" Harlan's fingers punched out the short lines. All the talk of the market. The initials spell out ATOM, which is English for atom. Is that coincidence too? Not a chance. Don't you see, computer, how this advertisement fits the conditions you yourself set up? It caught my eye instantly. Cooper knew it would, out of sheer anachronism. At the same time, it has no meaning other than its face value, no meaning at all, for any man of the 19.32nd. So it must be Cooper. That's his message. We have the date to the nearest week of a century. We have his mailing address. It is only necessary to go after him, and I'm the only one with enough knowledge of the primitive to manage that.
"And you'll go?"
Twistle's face was ablaze with relief and happiness. "I'll go, on one condition." Twistle frowned in a sudden reversal of emotion.
"Again, conditions?"
"The same condition. I'm not adding new ones. Noyes must be safe. She must come with me. I will not leave her behind."
"You still don't trust me? In what way have I failed you? What can there be that still disturbs you?"
"One thing, computer," said Harlan solemnly. "One thing still. There was a barrier across the 100,000th. Why? That is what still disturbs me." Chapter 17. The Closing Circle. It did not stop disturbing him. It was a matter that grew in mind as the days of preparation sped by. It interposed itself between him and Twistle, then between him and Noyes. When the day of departure came, he was only distantly aware of the fact. It was all he could do to rouse a shadow of interest when Twistle returned from a session with the council subcommittee. He said, "How did it go?" Twistle said wearily, "It wasn't exactly the most pleasant conversation I've ever had." Harlan was almost willing to let it go at that, but he broke his moment's silence with a muttered, "I suppose you said nothing about—"
No,
was the testy response.
I said nothing about the girl, or about your part in the misdirection of Cooper. It was an unfortunate error, a mechanical failure. I took full responsibility."
Harlan's conscience, burdened as it was, could find room for a twinge. He said, "That won't affect you well."
"What can they do? They must wait for the correction to be made before they can touch me. If we fail, we're all beyond help or harm. If we succeed, success itself will probably protect me. And if it doesn't—"
The old man shrugged.
"I plan to retire from active participation in eternity's affairs thereafter anyway."
But he fumbled his cigarette and disposed of it before it was half burned away. He sighed.
"I would rather not have brought them into this at all, but there would have been no way otherwise of using the special kettle for further trips past the Downwind terminus."
Harlan turned away. His thoughts moved around and about the same channels that had been occupied to the increasing exclusion of all else for days. He heard Twistle's further remark dimly, but it was only at its repetition that he said with a start, "Pardon me?"
"I say, is your woman ready, boy? Does she understand what she's to do?"
"She's ready. I've told her everything."
"How did she take it?"
"What? Oh, yes, as I expected her to. She's not afraid."
"It's less than 3 physio hours now."
"I know." That was all for the moment, and Harlan was left alone with his thoughts and a sickening realization of what he must do. With the kettle loading done and the controls adjusted, Harlan and Noyes appeared in a final change of costume, approximating that of an unurbanized area of the early 20th. Noyes had modified Harlan's suggestion for her wardrobe according to some instinctive feeling she claimed women had when it came to matters of clothing and aesthetics. She chose thoughtfully from pictures in the advertisements of the appropriated volumes of the news magazine and had minutely scrutinized items imported from a dozen different centuries. Occasionally she would say to Harlan, "What do you think?" He would shrug. "If it's instinctive knowledge, I'll leave it to you." "That's a bad sign, Andrew," she said, with a lightness that did not quite ring true. "You're too pliable. What's the matter anyway? You're just not yourself. You haven't been for days." "I'm all right," Harlan said in a monotone. Twistle's first sight of them in the role of natives of the 20th elicited a feeble attempt at jocularity. "Father Time," he said. "What ugly costumes in the primitive, and yet how it fails to hide your beauty, my dear." Noyes smiled warmly at him, and Harlan, standing there impassively silent, was forced to admit that Twistle's rust-choked vein of gallantry had something of truth in it. Noyes's clothing encompassed her without accentuating her as clothing should. Her makeup was confined to unimaginative dabs of color on lips and cheeks, and an ugly rearrangement of the eyebrow line. Her lovely hair, this had been the worst of it, had been cut ruthlessly. Yet she was beautiful. Harlan himself was already growing accustomed to his own uncomfortable belt, the tightness of fit under armpits and in the crotch, and the mousy lack of color about his rough-textured clothing. Wearing strange costumes to suit a century was an old story to him. Twistle was saying, "Now what I really wanted to do was to install hand controls inside the kettle, as we discussed, but there isn't any way, apparently. The engineers simply must have a source of power large enough to handle temporal displacement, and that isn't available outside eternity. Temporal tension, while occupying the primitive, is all that can be managed. However, we have a return lever." He led them into the kettle, picking his way among the piled supplies, and pointed out the obtruding finger of metal that now marred the smooth inner wall of the kettle. "It amounts to the installation of a simple switch," he said. "Instead of returning automatically to eternity, the kettle will remain in the primitive indefinitely. Once the lever is plunged home, however, you will return. There will then be the matter of the second and, I hope, final trip." "A second trip?" asked Noyes at once. Harlan said, "I haven't explained that. Look, this first trip is intended merely to fix the time of Cooper's arrival precisely. We don't know how long a time-lapse exists between his arrival and the placing of the advertisement. We'll reach him by the post office box and learn, if possible, the exact minute of his arrival, or as close as we can anyway. We can then return to that moment plus 15 minutes to allow for the kettle to have left Cooper." Twistle interposed. "Couldn't have the kettle in the same place at the same time in two different physiotimes, you know," and tried to smile. Noyes seemed to absorb it. "I see," she said, not too definitely. Twistle said to Noyes, "Picking up Cooper at the time of his arrival will reverse all micro-changes. The A-bomb advertisement will disappear again, and Cooper will know only that the kettle, having disappeared as we told him it would, had unexpectedly appeared again. He will not know that he was in the wrong century, and he will not be told. We will tell him that there was some vital instruction we had forgotten to give him. We'll have to manufacture some. And we can only hope that he will regard the matter as so unimportant that he won't mention being sent back twice when he writes his memoir." Noyes lifted her plucked eyebrows. "It's very complicated." "Yes, unfortunately." He rubbed his hands together and looked at the others as though nursing an inner doubt. Then he straightened, produced a fresh cigarette, and even managed a certain jauntiness as he said, "And now, boy, good luck." Twistle touched hands briefly with Harlan, nodded to Noyes, and stepped out of the kettle. "Are we leaving now?" asked Noyes of Harlan when they were alone. "In a few minutes," said Harlan. He glanced sideways at Noyes. She was looking up at him, smiling, unfrightened. Momentarily, his own spirits responded to that. But that was emotion, not reason, he counseled himself, instinct, not thought. He looked away. The trip was nothing, or almost nothing, no different from an ordinary kettle ride. Midway there was a kind of internal jar that might have been the downwind terminus, and might have been purely psychosomatic. It was barely noticeable. And then they were in the primitive, and they stepped into a craggy, lonely world, brightened by the splendor of an afternoon sun. There was a soft wind with a chilly edge to it, and most of all, silence. The bare rocks were tumbled and mighty, colored into dull rainbows by compounds of iron, copper, and chromium. The grandeur of the manless and all but lifeless surroundings dwarfed and shriveled Harlan. Eternity, which did not belong to the world of matter, had no sun and none but imported air. His memories of his own home when were dim. His observations in the various centuries had dealt with men and their cities. He had never experienced this. Noyes touched his elbow. "Andrew, I'm cold." He turned to her with a start. She said, "Hadn't we better set up the radiant?" He said, "Yes, in Cooper's cavern." "Do you know where it is?" "It's right here," he said shortly. He had no doubt of that. The memoir had located it, and first Cooper, now he, had been pinpointed back to it. He had not doubted precision pinpointing in time travel since his cubhood days. He remembered himself then, facing Educator Yarrow seriously, saying, "But Earth moves about the sun, and the sun moves about the galactic center, and the galaxy moves too. If you start from some point on Earth and move down 100 years, you'll be in empty space, because it will take 100 years for Earth to reach that point." Those were the days when he still referred to a century as 100 years. And Educator Yarrow had snapped back, "You don't separate time from space. Moving through time, you share Earth's motions. Or do you believe that a bird flying through the air whiffs out into space because the Earth is hurrying around the sun at 18 miles a second and vanishes from under the creature?" Arguing from analogy is risky, but Harlan obtained more rigorous proof in later days, and now, after a scarcely precedented trip into the primitive, he could turn confidently and feel no surprise at finding the opening precisely where he had been told it would be. He moved the camouflage of loose rubble and rock to one side and entered. He probed the darkness within, using the white beam of his flash almost like a scalpel. He scoured the walls, ceiling, floor, every inch. Noyes, remaining close behind him, whispered, "What are you looking for?" He said, "Something, anything." He found his something-anything at the very rear of the cave, in the shape of a flattish stone covering greenish sheets like a paperweight. Harlan threw the stone aside and flipped the sheets past one thumb. "What are they?" asked Noyes. "Banknotes. A medium of exchange, money." "Did you know they were there?" "I knew nothing, I just hoped." It was only a matter of using Twistle's reverse logic of calculating cause from effect. Eternity existed, so Cooper must be making correct decisions too. In assuming the advertisement would pull Harlan into the correct time, the cave was an obvious additional means of communication. Yet this was almost better than he had dared hope. More than once during the preparations for his trip into the primitive, Harlan had thought that making his way into a town with nothing but bullion in his possession would result in suspicion and delay. Cooper had managed, to be sure, but Cooper had had time. Harlan hefted the sheaf of bills, and he must have used time to accumulate this much. He had done well, the youngster, marvelously well. And the circle was closing. The supplies had been moved into the cave, in the increasingly ruddy glow of the westering sun. The kettle had been covered by a diffuse reflecting film which would hide it from any but the closest of prying eyes, and Harlan had a blaster to take care of those, if need be. The radiant was set up in the cave, and the flash was wedged into a crevice so that they had heat and light. Outside, it was a chill March night. Noyes stared thoughtfully into the smooth paraboloid interior of the radiant as it slowly rotated. She said, "Andrew, what are your plans?" "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I'll leave for the nearest town. I know where it is, or should be." He changed it back to is, in his mind. there would be no trouble. Twistle's logic again. "I'll come with you, won't I?" He shook his head. "You can't speak the language, for one thing, and the trip will be difficult enough for one to negotiate." Noyes looked strangely archaic in her short hair, and the sudden anger in her eyes made Harlan look away uneasily. She said, "I'm no fool, Andrew. You scarcely speak to me. You don't look at me. What is it? Is your home-when morality taking hold? Do you feel you have betrayed eternity, and are you blaming me for that? Do you feel I have corrupted you? What is it?" He said, "You don't know what I feel." She said, "Then describe it. You might as well. You'll never have a chance as good as this one. Do you feel love? For me? You couldn't, or you wouldn't be using me as a scapegoat. Why did you bring me here? Tell me. Why not have left me in eternity, since you have no use for me here, and since it seems you can hardly bear the sight of me?" Harlan muttered, "There's danger." "Oh, come now." "It's more than danger. It's a nightmare. Computer Twistle's nightmare," said Harlan. "It was during our last panicky flash up-when into the hidden centuries that he told me of thoughts he had had concerning those centuries. He speculated on the possibility of evolved varieties of man, new species, supermen perhaps, hiding in the far up-when, cutting themselves off from our interference, plotting to end our tamperings with reality. He thought it was they who built the barrier across the 100,000th. Then we found you, and Computer Twistle abandoned his nightmare. He decided there had never been a barrier. He returned to the more immediate problem of salvaging eternity. But I, you see, had been infected by his nightmare. I had experienced the barrier, so I knew it existed. No Eternal had built it, for Twistle said such a thing was theoretically impossible. Maybe Eternity's theories didn't go far enough. The barrier was there. Someone had built it. Or something. Of course, he went on thoughtfully. Twistle was wrong in some ways. He felt that man must evolve, but that's not so. Paleontology is not one of the sciences that interest Eternals, but it interested the late primitives, so I picked up a bit of it myself. I know this much. Species evolve only to meet the pressures of new environments. In a stable environment, a species may remain unchanged for millions of centuries. Primitive man evolved rapidly because his environment was a harsh and changing one. Once, however, mankind learned to create his own environment. He created a pleasant and stable one, so he just naturally stopped evolving. "I don't know what you're talking about," said Noyes, sounding not the least mollified. "And you're not saying anything about us, which is what I want to talk about." Harlan managed to remain outwardly unmoved. He said, "Now why the barrier at the 100,000th? What purpose did it serve? You weren't harmed. What other meaning could it have, I asked myself? What happened because of its presence that would not have happened had it been absent?" He paused, looking at his clumsy and heavy boots of natural leather. It occurred to him that he could add to his comfort by removing them for the night, but not now, not now. He said, "There was only one answer to that question. The existence of that barrier sent me raving back down-when to get a neuronic whip, to assault Finge. It fired me to the thought of risking eternity to get you back, and smashing eternity when I thought I had failed. Do you see?" Noyes stared at him with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Do you mean the people in the up-when wanted you to do all that? They planned it?" "Yes. Don't look at me like that. Yes. And don't you see how it makes everything different? As long as I acted on my own, for reasons of my own, I'll take all the consequences, material and spiritual. But to be fooled into it, to be tricked into it, by people handling and manipulating my emotions as though I were a computerplex on which it was only necessary to insert the properly perforated foils." Harlan realized suddenly that he was shouting, and stopped abruptly. He let a few moments pass, then said, "That is impossible to take. I've got to undo what I was marionetted into doing, and when I undo it, I will be able to rest again." And he would, perhaps. He could feel the coming of an impersonal triumph, dissociated from the personal tragedy which lay behind and ahead. The circle was closing. Noyes's hand reached out uncertainly, as though to take his own rigid, unyielding one. Harlan drew away, avoided her sympathy. He said, "It had all been arranged. My meeting with you, everything. My emotional makeup had been analyzed, obviously. Action and response. Push this button, and the man will do that. Push that button, and he will do this." Harlan was speaking with difficulty, out of the depths of shame. He shook his head, trying to shake the horror of it away as a dog would water, then went on. "One thing I didn't understand at first. How did I come to guess that Cooper was to be sent back into the primitive? It was a most unlikely thing to guess. I had no basis. Twistle didn't understand it. More than once he wondered how I could have done it with so little understanding of mathematics. Yet I had. The first time was that night. You were asleep, but I wasn't. I had the feeling then that there was something I must remember, some remark, some thought, something that I had caught sight of in the excitement and exhilaration of the evening. When I thought long, the whole significance of Cooper sprang into my mind, and along with it, the thought entered my mind that I was in a position to destroy eternity. Later I checked through histories of mathematics, but it was unnecessary, really. I already knew. I was certain of it. How? How? Noyes stared at him intently. She didn't try to touch him now. "Do you mean the men of the Hidden Centuries arranged that, too? They put it all in your mind, then maneuvered you properly?" "Yes. Yes. Nor are they done. There is still work for them to do. The circle may be closing, but it is not yet closed." "How can they do anything now? They're not here with us." "No." He said the word in so hollow a voice that Noyes paled. "Invisible super things?" she whispered. "Not super things. Not invisible. I told you man would not evolve while he controlled his own environment. The people of the Hidden Centuries are Homo sapiens. Ordinary people." "Then they're certainly not here." Harlan said sadly, "You're here, Noyes." "Yes, and you, and no one else." "You and I," agreed Harlan. "No one else. A woman of the Hidden Centuries and I." "Don't act any more, Noyes. Please." She stared at him with horror. "What are you saying, Andrew?" "What I must say. What were you saying that evening, when you gave me the peppermint drink? You were talking to me, your soft voice, soft words. I heard nothing, not consciously, but I remember your delicate voice whispering. About what? The downwind journey of Cooper, the Samson smash of eternity, am I right?" Noyes said, "I don't even know what Samson smash means." "You can guess very accurately, Noyes. Tell me, when did you enter the 482nd? Whom did you replace? Or did you just squeeze in? I had your life plot worked out by an expert in the 2456th. In the new reality you had no existence at all, no analog. Strange for such a small change, but not impossible. And then the life plotter said one thing which I heard with my ears, but not with my mind. Strange that I should remember it. Perhaps even then something clanged in my mind, but I was too full of you to listen. He said, with the combination of factors you handed me, I don't quite see how she fit in the old reality. He was right. You didn't fit in. You were an invader from the far up when, manipulating me, and Finge too, to suit yourself. Noyes said urgently, "Andrew!" It all fit in, if I had the eyes to look. A book film in your house entitled Social and Economic History. It surprised me when I first saw it. You needed it, didn't you, to teach you how best to be a woman of the century. Another item. Our first trip into the Hidden Centuries, remember? You stopped the kettle at the 111,394th. You stopped it, with finesse, without fumbling. Where did you learn to control a kettle? If you were what you seemed to be, that would have been your first trip in a kettle. Why the 111,394th anyway? Was it your home when? She said softly, "Why did you bring me to the primitive, Andrew?" He shouted suddenly, "To protect eternity! I could not tell what damage you might do there. Here you are helpless because I know you. Admit that all I say is true. Admit it!" He rose in a paroxysm of wrath, arm upraised. She did not flinch. She was utterly calm. She might have been modeled out of warm, beautiful wax. Harlan did not complete his motion. He said, "Admit it!" She said, "Are you so uncertain? After all your deductions, what will it matter to you whether I admit it or not?" Harlan felt the wildness mount. "Admit it anyway, so that I need feel no pain at all, none at all." "Pain?" "Because I have a blaster, Noyes, and it is my intention to kill you." Chapter 18. The Beginning of Infinity. There was a crawling uncertainty inside Harlan, an irresolution that was consuming him. He had the blaster in his hand. It was aimed at Noyes. But why did she say nothing? Why did she persist in this impassive attitude? How could he kill her? How could he not kill her? He said hoarsely, "Well?" She moved, but it was only to clasp her hands loosely in her lap, to look more relaxed, more aloof. When she spoke, her voice seemed scarcely that of a human being. Facing the muzzle of a blaster, it yet gained assurance and took on an almost mystic quality of impersonal strength. She said, "You cannot wish to kill me only in order to protect eternity. If that were your desire, you could stun me, tie me firmly, pin me within this cave, and then take to your travels in the dawn. Or you might have asked Computer Twistle to keep me in solitary confinement during your absence in the primitive. Or you might take me with you at dawn, lose me in the wastes. If it is only killing that will satisfy you, it is only because you think that I have betrayed you, that I have tricked you into love first, in order that I might trick you into treason later. This is murder out of wounded pride, and not at all the just retribution you tell yourself it is." Harlan squirmed. "Are you from the hidden centuries, tell me?" Noyes said, "I am. Will you now blast?" Harlan's finger trembled on the blaster's contact point, yet he hesitated. Something irrational within him could still plead her case and point up the remnants of his own futile love and longing. Was she desperate at his rejection of her? Was she deliberately courting death by lying? Was she indulging in foolish heroics born of despair at his doubts of her? No. The book films of the sickly sweet literary tradition of the 289th might have it so, but not a girl like Noyes. She was not one to meet her death at the hands of a false lover with the joyful masochism of a broken, bleeding lily. Then was she scornfully denying his ability to kill her for any reason whatever? Was she confidently relying on the attraction she knew she had for him, even now, certain that it would immobilize him, freeze him in weakness and shame? That hit too closely. His finger clamped a bit harder on the contact. Noyes spoke again. "You're waiting. Does that mean you expect me to enter a brief for the defense?" "What defense?" Harlan tried to make that scornful, yet he welcomed the diversion. It could postpone the moment when he must look down upon her blasted body, upon whatever remnants of bloody flesh might remain, and know that what had been done to his beautiful Noyes had been done by his own hand. He found excuses for his delay. He thought feverishly, let her talk. Let her tell what she can about the hidden centuries, so much better protection for eternity. It put a front of firm policy on his action, and for the moment he could look at her with as calm a face almost as she looked at him. Noyes might have read his mind. She said, "Do you want to know about the hidden centuries? If that will be a defense, it is easily done. Would you like to know, for instance, why Earth is empty of mankind after the 150,000th? Would you be interested?" Harlan wasn't going to plead for knowledge, nor was he going to buy knowledge. He had the blaster. He was very intent on no show of weakness. He said, "Talk," and flushed at the little smile which was her first response to his exclamation. She said, "At a moment in physio-time before eternity had reached very far up when, before it had reached even the 10,000th, we of our century, and you're right, it was the 111,394th, learned of eternity's existence. We too had time travel, you see, but it was based on a completely different set of postulates than yours, and we preferred to view time rather than shifting mass. Furthermore, we dealt with our past only, our down when. We discovered eternity indirectly. First, we developed the calculus of realities and tested our own reality through it. We were amazed to find we lived in a reality of rather low probability. It was a serious question. Why such an improbable reality? You seem abstracted, Andrew. Are you interested at all? Harlan heard her say his name with all the intimate tenderness she had used in weeks past. It should grate on him now, anger him with its cynical faithlessness. And yet it didn't. He said desperately, "Go on and get it over with, woman." He tried to balance the warmth of her Andrew with the chill anger of his woman, and yet she only smiled again, pallidly. She said, "We searched back through time and came across the growing eternity. It seemed obvious to us almost at once that there had been at one point in physio-time a conception we have also but under another name, another reality. The other reality, the one of maximum probability, we call the basic state. The basic state had encompassed us once, or had encompassed our analogues at least. At the time, we could not say what the nature of the basic state was. We could not possibly know. We did know, however, that some change initiated by eternity in the far down when had managed, through the workings of statistical chance, to alter the basic state all the way up to our century and beyond. We set about determining the nature of the basic state, intending to undo the evil, if evil it was. First, we set up the quarantined area you call the hidden centuries, isolating the eternals on the down when side of the 70,000th. This armor of isolation would protect us from all but a vanishingly small percentage of the changes being made. It wasn't absolute security, but it gave us time. We next did something our culture and ethics did not ordinarily allow us to do. We investigated our own future, our up-when. We learned the destiny of man in the reality that actually existed, in order that we might compare it, eventually, with the basic state. Somewhere, past the 125,000th, mankind solved the secret of the interstellar drive. They learned how to manage the jump through hyperspace. Finally, mankind could reach the stars. Harlan was listening in growing absorption to her measured words. How much truth was there in all this? How much was a calculated attempt to deceive him? He tried to break the spell by speaking, by breaking the smooth flow of her sentences. He said, "And once they could reach the stars, they did so and left the earth. Some of us have guessed that. Then some of you have guessed wrong. Man tried to leave Earth. Unfortunately, however, we are not alone in the galaxy. There are other stars with other planets, you know. There are even other intelligences. None in this galaxy, at least, are as ancient as mankind, but in the 125,000 centuries man remained on Earth, younger minds caught up and passed us, developed the interstellar drive, and colonized the galaxy. When we moved out into space, the signs were up. Occupied, no trespassing, clear out. Mankind drew back its exploratory feelers, remained at home. But now, he knew Earth for what it was, a prison, surrounded by an infinity of freedom. And mankind died out. Harlan said, "Just died out." Nonsense. They didn't just die out. It took thousands of centuries. There were ups and downs, but on the whole, there was a loss of purpose, a sense of futility, a feeling of hopelessness that could not be overcome. Eventually, there was one last decline of the birth rate, and finally, extinction. Your eternity did that. Harlan could defend eternity now, the more intensely and extravagantly for having so shortly before attacked it so keenly. He said, "Let us at the hidden centuries, and we will correct that. We have not failed yet to achieve the greatest good in those centuries we could reach." "The greatest good?" asked Noyes, in a detached tone that seemed to make a mockery of the phrase. "What is that? Your machines tell you. Your computerplexes. But who adjusts the machines and tells them what to weigh in the balance? The machines do not solve problems with greater insight than men do, only faster. Only faster. Then what is it the Eternals consider good? I'll tell you. Safety and security. Moderation. Nothing in excess. No risks without overwhelming certainty of an adequate return. Harlan swallowed. With sudden force he remembered Twistle's words in the kettle while talking about the evolved men of the hidden centuries. He said, "We bred out the unusual." And wasn't it so? "Well," said Noyes, "you seem to be thinking. Think of this, then. In the reality that now exists, why is it that man is continually attempting space travel and continually failing? Surely each space travel era must know of previous failures. Why try again, then?" Harlan said, "I haven't studied the matter." But he thought uneasily of the colonies on Mars, established again and again, always failing. He thought of the odd attraction that spaceflight always had, even for Eternals. He could hear sociologist Cantor Voy of the 2456th sighing at the loss of electrogravitic spaceflight in one century and saying longingly, "It had been very beautiful." And life plotter Niran Farouk, who had sworn bitterly at its passing and had launched into a fit of railing at Eternity's handling of anti-cancer serums to ease his spirit. Was there such a thing as an instinctive yearning on the part of intelligent beings to expand outward, to reach the stars, to leave the prison of gravity behind? Was it that which forced man to develop interplanetary travel dozens of times, forced him to travel over and over again to the dead worlds of a solar system in which only Earth was livable? Was it the eventual failure, the knowledge that one must return to the home prison, that brought about the maladjustments that Eternity was forever fighting? Harlan thought of the drug addiction in those same futile centuries of the electrogravitics. Noyes said, "In ironing out the disasters of reality, Eternity rules out the triumphs as well. It is in meeting the great tests that mankind can most successfully rise to great heights. Out of danger and restless insecurity comes the force that pushes mankind to newer and loftier conquests. Can you understand that? Can you understand that in averting the pitfalls and miseries that beset man, Eternity prevents men from finding their own bitter and better solutions, the real solutions that come from conquering difficulty, not avoiding it?" Harlan began woodenly. "The greatest good of the greatest number," Noyes cut in. "Suppose Eternity had never been established." "Well, I'll tell you what would have happened. The energies that went into temporal engineering would have gone into nucleonics instead. Eternity would not have come, but the interstellar drive would. Man would have reached the stars more than 100,000 centuries before he did in this current reality. The stars would then have been untenanted, and mankind would have established itself throughout the galaxy. We would have been first." "And what would have been gained?" asked Harlan doggedly. "Would we be happier?" "Whom do you mean by we? Man would not be a world, but a million worlds, a billion worlds. We would have the infinite in our grasp. Each world would have its own stretch of the centuries, each its own values, a chance to seek happiness after ways of its own, in an environment of its own. There are many happinesses, many goods, infinite variety. That is the basic state of mankind." "You're guessing," said Harlan, and he was angry at himself for feeling attraction for the picture she had conjured. "How can you tell what would have happened?" Noyes said, "You smile at the ignorance of the timers who know only one reality. We smile at the ignorance of the Eternals who think there are many realities, but that only one exists at a time." "What does that gibberish mean?" "We don't calculate alternate realities. We view them. We see them in their state of non-reality." "A kind of ghostly Never-Never Land where the might-have-beens play with the ifs?" "Without the sarcasm, yes." "And how do you do that?" Noyes paused, then said, "How can I explain that, Andrew? I have been educated to know certain things without really understanding all about them, just as you have. Can you explain the workings of a computerplex? Yet you know it exists and works. Harlan flushed. Well then? Noyes said, we learned to view realities, and we found basic state to be as I have described. We found, too, the change that had destroyed basic state. It was not any change that eternity had initiated. It was the establishment of eternity itself, the mere fact of its existence. Any system like eternity, which allows men to choose their own future, will end by choosing safety and mediocrity, and in such a reality the stars are out of reach. The mere existence of eternity at once wiped out the galactic empire. To restore it, eternity must be done away with. The number of realities is infinite. The number of any subclass of realities is also infinite. For instance, the number of realities containing eternity is infinite. The number in which eternity does not exist is infinite. The number in which eternity does exist but is abolished is also infinite. But my people chose from among the infinite a group that involved me. I had nothing to do with that. They educated me for my job as Twistle and yourself educated Cooper for his job. But the number of realities in which I was the agent in destroying eternity was also infinite. I was offered a choice among 5 realities that seemed least complex. I chose this one, the one involving you, the only reality system involving you. Harlan said, why did you choose it? Noyes looked away. Because I loved you, you see. I loved you long before I met you. Harlan was shaken. She said it with such depths of sincerity. He thought sickly, she's an actress. He said, that's rather ridiculous. Is it? I studied the realities at my disposal. I studied the reality in which I went back to the 482nd, met first Finge, then you. The one in which you came to me and loved me, in which you took me into eternity, and the far up when of my own century in which you misdirected Cooper, and in which you and I, together, returned to the primitive. We lived in the primitive for the rest of our days. I saw our lives together and they were happy, and I loved you. So it's not ridiculous at all. I chose this alternative so that our love might be true. Harlan said, all this is false. It's false. How can you expect me to believe you? He stopped, then said suddenly, wait. You say you knew all this in advance. All that would happen. Yes. Then you're obviously lying. You would have known that I would have you here at Blaster Point. You would have known you would fail. What is your answer to that? She sighed lightly. I told you there are an infinite number of any subclass of realities. No matter how finely we focus on a given reality, it always represents an infinite number of very similar realities. There are fuzzy spots. The finer we focus, the less fuzzy, but perfect sharpness cannot be obtained. The less fuzzy, the lower the probability of chance variations spoiling the result, but the probability is never absolutely zero. One fuzzy spot spoiled things. Which? You were to have come back to the far up when, after the barrier at the 100,000th had been lowered, and you did. But you were to have come back alone. It was for that reason that I was momentarily so startled at seeing Computer Twistle with you. Again, Harlan was troubled. How she made things fit in. Noyes said, I would have been even more startled had I realized the significance of that alteration in full. Had you come alone, you would have brought me back to the primitive as you did. Then, for love of humanity, for love of me, you would have left Cooper untouched. Your circle would have been broken, eternity ended. Our life together here, safe. But you came with Twistle, a chance variation. While coming, he talked to you of his thoughts about the hidden centuries, and started you on a train of deductions that ended with your doubting my good faith. It ended with a blaster between us. And now, Andrew, that's the story. You may blast me. There is nothing to stop you. Harlan's hand ached from its spastic grasp on the blaster. He shifted it dizzily to the other hand. Was there no flaw in her story? Where was the resolution he was to have gained from knowing certainly that she was a creature of the hidden centuries? He was more than ever tearing at himself in conflict, and dawn was approaching. He said, Why 2 efforts to end eternity? Why couldn't eternity have ended once and for all when I sent Cooper back to the 20th? Things would have ended then, and there would not have been this agony of uncertainty.
Because, said Noyes, ending this eternity is not enough. We must reduce the probability of establishing any form of eternity to as near zero as we can manage. So there is one thing we must do here in the primitive. A small change, a little thing. You know what a minimum necessary change is like. It is only a letter to a peninsula called Italy, here in the 20th. It is now the 19.32nd. In a few centicenturies, provided I send the letter, a man of Italy will begin experimenting with the neutronic bombardment of uranium. Harlan found himself horrified. You will alter primitive history? Yes, it is our intention. In the new reality, the final reality, the first nuclear explosion will take place not in the 30th century, but in the 19.45th. But do you know the danger? Can you possibly estimate the danger? We know the danger. We have viewed the sheaf of resulting realities. There is a probability, not a certainty, of course, that Earth will end with a largely radioactive crust. But before that, you mean there can be compensation for that? A galactic empire, an actual intensification of the basic state. Yet you accuse the Eternals of interfering. We accuse them of interfering many times to keep mankind safely at home and in prison. We interfere once, to turn him prematurely to nucleonics, so that he might never establish an eternity. No, said Harlan desperately. There must be an eternity. If you choose. It is yours to choose. If you wish to have psychopaths dictate the future of man— Psychopaths! Exploded Harlan. Aren't they? You know them. Think. Harlan stared at her in outraged horror, yet he could not help thinking. He thought of Cubs learning the truth about reality, and Club La Tourette trying to kill himself as a result. La Tourette had survived to become an Eternal with what scars on his personality none could say, yet helping to decide on alternate realities. He thought of the caste system in eternity, of the abnormal life that turned guilt feelings into anger and hatred against technicians. He thought of computers struggling against themselves, of Finge intriguing against Twistle, and Twistle spying on Finge. He thought of Senor fighting his bald head by fighting all the Eternals. He thought of himself. Then he thought of Twistle, the great Twistle, also breaking the laws of eternity. It was as though he had always known eternity to be all this. Why else should he have been so willing to destroy it? Yet he had never admitted it to himself fully. He had never looked it clearly in the face, until suddenly, now. And he saw eternity with great clarity as a sink of deepening psychoses, a writhing pit of abnormal motivation, a mass of desperate lives torn brutally out of context. He looked blankly at Noyes. She said, softly, Do you see? Come to the mouth of the cave with me, Andrew. He followed her, hypnotized, appalled at the completeness with which he had gained a new viewpoint. His blaster fell away from the line connecting it and Noyes's heart for the first time. The pale streakings of dawn grayed the sky, and the bulking kettle just outside the cave was an oppressive shadow against the pallor. Its outlines were dulled and blurred by the film thrown over it. Noyes said, This is Earth, not the eternal and only home of mankind, but only a starting point of an infinite adventure. All you need do is make the decision. It is yours to make. You and I and the contents of this cave will be protected by a physio-time field against the change. Cooper will disappear, along with his advertisement. Eternity will go, and the reality of my century. But we will remain to have children and grandchildren, and mankind will remain to reach the stars. He turned to look at her, and she was smiling at him. It was Noyes as she had been, and his own heart beating as it had used to. He wasn't even aware that he had made his decision
until the grayness suddenly invaded all the sky as the hulk of the kettle disappeared from against it. With that disappearance, he knew, even as Noyes moved slowly into his arms, came the end, the final end of eternity, and the beginning of infinity.